Hi everybody and welcome to this video which covers enhancing memory. So this video is going to cover the mnemonics that we can use to enhance our memory skills. This is part of the cognitive psychology topic for stage 1 psychology. Let's get started. So there are a number of ways to improve our memories using strategies, and these strategies collectively are known as mnemonics. So these aim to enhance the brain's ability to encode and store information in more effective ways. So some common mnemonics include the following. So clustering or chunking, peg words, method of loci, and reworking. So let's get into these in more detail. So clustering or chunking. So the clustering technique uses the knowledge that the short-term memory can hold up to 7 pieces of information, give or take 2, at one time. So chunking information means grouping it into smaller chunks to stretch the short-term memory store so we can take in more information. So clustering uses this concept to put similar pieces of information into groups that can then be triggered by a single retrieval cue. So a very good example, as pictured here, is a shopping list. So this might be grouped into toiletries, frozen foods, dry foods, fruit and vegetables, etc. So these clusters or chunks can be grouped, meaning that they can also be grouped into subgroups. So they can be grouped hierarchically, as you can see there, but also into smaller subgroups. So in the above example, this could involve using berries as a subgroup for the fruits cluster. Another very good example of this is when we remember people's mobile phone numbers. So we won't obviously remember all 10 digits or so in a row. That can be very difficult. So we'll chunk them into the first 3 or 4 so it's easier to recall. Next, we have the pegwork technique. So the pegwork technique or method is a mnemonic strategy that involves the use of objects that are chosen to rhyme with individual pieces of information, such as numbers, as you can see here. So these objects create mental images which encourage structural processing, while the use of rhyming induces phonetic processing. So we're using the 2 deepest layers of processing, which I've talked about in a previous video. So using an object that's meaningful to you is most powerful, as you are then using semantic processing to encode more simple information. So this technique is often used for remembering the order of playing cards, for example, for which there are international competitions. Okay, so looking at reworking. So reworking involves using the information in another way, such as putting it into your own words or discussing it with someone else. So we're reworking the information so it makes sense to us. So this has the added bonus of using personally meaningful words, which adds to the semantic processing already at work. So this acts to help you encode the information at a deeper level, which we know is the semantic level, rather than simply taking in facts, let's say at the structural level, and is the best way to learn new information. So it's essentially what you're required to do in your assessments at school. So you do research and then you need to put the findings into your own words. It helps you understand the concepts if you can rearrange them in a way that makes sense to you. Now, the method of loci is one of the most elaborative mnemonic devices, and it requires 3 stages to be carried out to remember information. So firstly, each piece of information is linked to an object for which you can create a visual image. So for example, the word bird might be linked to the image of a rubber duck. Secondly, you're asked to think of a physical location that is familiar to you. This might be a street or a house or a landmark nearby. Finally, you place each of the objects in a specific location along a route through or past your familiar place. So, mentally navigating through the route and it's visualizing the objects interacting with the positions you put them in should help you remember the information. So you, for example, might place the rubber duck in your bathtub while moving through your house. So this device uses semantic processing as you've already assigned the meaning to the information, as well as utilizing your long-term memory for the place that you've already chosen. So this can be a really, really effective way to remember things that are quite complex or lots of information at once by giving them a specific location and linking the objects to that location. Now, we should also cover other factors that do impact memory recall. The first being massed practice. So massed practice is the process of learning information in one very intensive session. So for example, you could learn about a topic in one lesson at school, but then not revisit the information again until it's time to be assessed, often known as cramming. So the chances of this information being retained in the long-term memory store are limited unless it's deeply processed and there's no time for consolidation. So in other words, if you don't have time to revise, okay, so you're expected to learn something very quickly without, much notice, that would be the case where you would use massed practice. So you need a very intensive study session to store it quickly and effectively as possible into your long-term memory store. So massed practice is said to be good for learning basic skills that don't require complex cognition, such as physical action. So again, remembering a list of 10 words would be completely fine to do if you were to use massed practice, because it's not a huge amount of information, it's not too complex, and there's still enough time to do it in a relatively quickly manner. Whereas distributed practice is a little bit different. So distributed practice is where learning is revisited at spaced intervals, which help to consolidate the learning and reactivate the neural pathways. So for example, you could learn about a topic in a lesson, then revisit this learning a week later, or a couple of lessons later. So by doing this, you've retrieved the memory, you've strengthened the neural pathways, and bringing it from your long-term memory back to your short-term memory or your working memory, depending on the information. So distributed practice can also be used to create multiple context-dependent cues, depending on where you review the information. So that means that you are more likely to be able to remember the information in a variety of settings. It doesn't matter where you are, in other words. So Ebbinghaus also looked at distributed practice in his studies of long-term memory, and he found that with spaced learning, the forgetting curve changes shape, as you can see here. So in other words, the more we review it, or the more we distribute our practice or our revision, okay, the less time or the less rapid the decay will be, as you can see here. So in other words, just really spreading out or distributing our practice or our rehearsal. This is especially good in the lead up to exams that are a few weeks away, but you distribute your study, you distribute your practice. We can see that the decay of information becomes far less rapid. Okay, looking at overlearning now. So overlearning was explored by Ebbinghaus, who defined it as further learning taking place after the point at which information can be recalled with complete accuracy. So later studies into overlearning have found mixed results. So physical skills seem to increase in ability, but cognitive skills decline after overlearning has occurred. So this may be because of different theories that we've covered in a previous video. So it may be interference, it may be displacement, etc. It also seems to be most useful when the information is not needed for long periods of time. Now we know from Godden and Baddeley's study with scuba divers in my previous video that context-dependent cues are important for recall. So if you learn the information you're going to be tested on in the classroom for that subject, I've said this before in class, you're more likely to recall it on the test than if it takes place in the same classroom. So likewise, if you study the required material at your homework desk and then work on an assessment piece there, you're more likely to retrieve the learnt material easily. So basically where we actually learn the information or encode the information in the first place is the same place we're more likely to recall it later. We also do need to mention levels of processing. So we've learned that deep processing, generally at the semantic level, will lead to improved retention of information, and it has formed multiple connections to previously learned information in our long-term memory store. So that means that the more meaning, in other words, you assign to information, the more likely you are to recall it later. Well, a lot of people will use stories or analogies to, enhance this process because it becomes more personally meaningful to them. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful. As always, if you've got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, happy revising.